Welcome to the English Epics channel, Georgetown, KY. Mike Bradford was the happiest man on earth. In just 10 days, he would marry Angela Wilson, his beloved, the love of his life, the woman with whom he would honor his vows and promises until death did them part. Angela's bridesmaids would be her 3 best friends, Betty, Christine, and Dolly. This group of 4 was always referred to as ABCD, their initials. Mike and Angela had met during the wedding of his friend Paul and Betty. He was the best man, and she was one of the bridesmaids. They exchanged phone numbers and soon began dating. A year later, they both decided to tie the knot. Christine had already been living with her boyfriend Ron for several months and eagerly awaited the day Ron would propose to her. Dolly, on the other hand, changed boyfriends every 6 months. At the moment, she was dating Elle. Mike's mother, Mary, never liked Angela. He knew this and thought that things would improve over time. He believed it was a form of jealousy that some mothers feel toward their daughters-in-law, thinking they are stealing their sons away. And Mike was an only child. His father, Josh, was different. On the first day, Mike brought Angela to meet his parents. Josh said to him, "Son, you've made your choice, you've made your decision, and now you'll have to take responsibility for it." Angela's parents, Peter and Julie, had blessed their relationship from the very beginning. Peter liked Mike from their first meeting. Julie was a bit overprotective of her daughter and always sought the best for her. She asked Mike to buy a house because her daughter couldn't live in a rented one. Mike replied that they would stay in his apartment and buy a house when they were ready to start a family. As at Betty's bachelorette party, only 4 friends would be present at Angela's. It was scheduled to take place a week before the couple exchanged vows. The location was kept a secret. "Hi, Mike," greeted Betty at the door. "Come in. Paul's in the bathroom. Take a seat." "I just want to discuss a few things with him," Mike replied. "Don't worry, Mike. Everything will be fine. I know how you're feeling these days, but calm down," Betty reassured him. "I know, but I don't want any last-minute problems to arise on my wedding day," Mike replied. "We'll be there to handle them if they do. Don't worry." Betty's cell phone rang. "I need to take this call," she said, standing up and heading to the kitchen. "Paul will be out any minute now." Mike could still hear the sound of running water. Left alone, Mike waited for 5 minutes before heading to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. He saw Betty on the terrace. She was still on the phone, standing with her back to him. He filled his glass and decided to step outside to get some fresh air. As he approached the slightly open sliding door, he heard Betty speaking, even though she was talking quietly, almost whispering. No, she said, sounding a bit irritated. "Why can't you understand that we can't afford 3 guys?" Mike froze and frowned. "Their payment starts when they leave Louisville. Don't forget we'll also have to cover their travel expenses too, and from Elmer Davis Lake." Mike leaned against the wall, trying not to be noticed. "With the cost of renting the cottage, drinks, and food, we just can't spend that much. Don't forget that all expenses are being split only 3 ways. We can't let Angela contribute a single cent. It's her party. 2 guys will be enough. I'll handle all the shopping on Saturday morning. A cottage, Elmer Davis Lake, guys from Louisville." Mike nearly fainted. "We'll all go in my SUV. It'll be easier that way. All right, I need to go." "Mike's here to meet with Paul?" Mike quickly set his glass in the sink and hurried to the living room. A few seconds later, Paul came down the stairs. Returning to his apartment, Mike silently praised himself for managing to stay calm in front of Betty. He knew she had been talking about the bachelorette party. It was going to be a night for just 1 girl. He couldn't help but wonder who the 2 guys were and what their roles would be. The girls had rented a cottage by Elmer Davis Lake, north of Georgetown. The 2 guys would come from Louisville. He closed his eyes for 5 minutes, replaying everything in his mind. When he opened them, he knew what he had to do. He grabbed his laptop, logged into the system, and started searching for a GPS tracking device. He browsed through all the available options and selected one that met all the necessary requirements. He purchased it on a website offering express delivery. Mike's phone rang. "Hello," he answered, recognizing Angela's number. "Hi, honey." Angela's voice was warm. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, of course." "Why do you ask?" "It's the way you said hello. I've been a little tense over the past few days." "You shouldn't be. Betty called me and said you looked really worried today." "Yes, Angela. Honestly, you're not planning to run away at the last minute, are you?" Angela joked. "I love you too much to do something like that." "I know, darling, and I love you just as much as you love me." "Angela, we've been exclusive since the day we started dating, and I will honor the vows and promises we make in 10 days. You are and always will be the only woman for me until the day I die. Of course, darling, I expect to be the only woman for you. We've been exclusive, and I will also keep my vows and promises. I trust you, Angela. Darling, is something wrong? I have a feeling that." "Everything's fine," Mike interrupted. "The thing is, we're making a huge step in our lives, and it's an incredible decision. Our future depends on it. Building a relationship and a shared future is like building a house. If the foundation isn't strong, it will collapse. The foundation here is love, trust, loyalty, communication, honesty, care for one another, and above all, respect. Why are you telling me all this, Mike? Do you have any doubts? Don't you trust me? I already said that I trust you. I just wanted you to know what I expect from our relationship as a married couple. We will be the perfect couple, Mike. We are a match made in heaven. I have some things to take care of. I'll call you later." "Okay, darling. I love you. Bye." Mike hung up. As soon as Angela put down the phone, she realized something was off with Mike. He hadn't said, "I love you too," like he usually did. His voice wasn't the same either. Her phone rang. It was Betty. "Hello, my angel," greeted Betty. "Hi." "I just got off the phone with Mike, and I feel like something is bothering him." "Don't worry. It's just pre-wedding jitters. Everything will be fine once he's in bed with you during the honeymoon." "I hope you're right." "I'm right," emphasized Betty. "Now, let's talk about this Saturday. We'll all go in my SUV." On Friday evening, Mike calmly parked on the street and walked to Paul's house. Betty's SUV was sitting in the driveway. He looked around, then slid under the vehicle. The GPS tracker was inside a small leather pouch, which he had attached to the vehicle's frame with 2 cable ties. He tugged on it to ensure it was securely fastened. Satisfied, he headed back to his car and drove away. On Saturday morning, Mike parked 2 blocks away from Paul's house. His eyes were glued to his Android phone. Suddenly, a small dot started moving. He started the car and followed it, maintaining a reasonable distance. First, the SUV stopped. At a grocery store, then at a liquor store, and finally picked up Christine and Dolly. When Mike tracked Betty back to her house, he was pleased with the GPS's performance. Back in his apartment, he called Paul to find out when Betty would leave after lunch. "Why are you asking?" Planning to follow her, Paul laughed into the phone. "No, I was thinking of coming over to your place, watching a DVD, having a beer, and ordering Chinese food." "I like that idea. Hold on, let me check with Betty." After a pause, "She's leaving around 4. "All right. If nothing comes up, I'll be at your place around 5. Anytime, brother." At 4:00, Mike parked in the same spot as in the morning. 15 minutes later, he started the engine and followed Betty's SUV as it pulled away. First, she picked up Christine, then Dolly, and finally Angela. When she got onto Route 227, Mike kept a distance of about 500 meters between their cars. When Mike noticed the marker had stopped moving, he knew they had reached their destination. He pulled over to the side of the road and waited. He called Paul, telling him that something had come up unexpectedly, and he wouldn't be able to make it over as planned. At dusk, he started his car and drove slowly. As he passed the cottage, he saw Betty's SUV parked in the driveway. The cottage. was situated on a large piece of land by the sea, surrounded by trees on both sides. He parked his car in the woods about 100 meters from the house. Grabbing his bag, which already contained everything he needed, he approached the cottage and hid behind a large tree. From his position, he could see the 4 friends, all in bikinis, having a barbecue by the lake. They were drinking wine. He could barely hear them and didn't want to risk getting closer. About an hour later, it got dark. Mike grew tired of standing and watching the 4 women enjoying themselves. Suddenly, he saw Betty grab her phone and shout to the others, "They'll be here in 15 minutes." The women were visibly excited. They quickly extinguished the fire, brought all the bottles and food into the house, and drew the curtains. Mike realized he wouldn't be able to see what was happening inside. Then he heard the screeching sound of tires. A Honda had just turned into the driveway and parked next to the SUV. 2 men got out, carrying a CD player. Mike frowned as he noticed they were wearing long coats. Betty opened the front door, hugged the 2 guys, led them inside, and locked the door. Mike quietly crept up to the cottage and approached a window. The curtain was fully drawn, and he couldn't see inside. He tried looking through another window but had no luck. Quietly, he moved to the back of the cottage by the lake and tried the sliding door. It opened. They were in such a hurry and so excited that they forgot to lock the back door, he thought. The first floor of the cottage consisted of a living room, dining room, and kitchen, all in an open-plan layout. He opened the door just a few centimeters and placed his camera, connected to a small power bank, on the floor. From where Mike was positioned, he could see what was happening in the living room. He stayed in the shadows, where no one from the living room would notice him unless he made a noise. All 4 women were sitting on the couch next to each other. One of the men turned on the CD player, and music immediately filled the cottage. They took off their coats and tossed them aside, moving their bodies to the rhythm of the music. They were wearing only thongs. The women nodded in anticipation. 2 strippers, Mike muttered angrily under his breath. The men started dancing to the music, moving closer to the women, swaying their hips back and forth in an erotic rhythm. Betty tried to touch one of the guys, but he quickly dodged her. The women booed the men. They repeated the same teasing gesture over and over, refusing to let the women touch them, taunting them. The 4 friends were becoming increasingly wild and visibly tense. After 30 minutes of dancing, the men removed their thongs, revealing everything. The women's eyes glittered. "Who is the chosen one?" one of the strippers asked. The 3 friends pointed to Angela. "Won't you say hello to my little girlfriend?" he asked Angela. "Hi," she giggled. "How about a kiss, since you're his friend?" "Come on, kiss him. Kiss him." Angela's friends laughed. Angela leaned forward and kissed him lightly. "Go on, don't be shy," Betty encouraged, playfully nudging her forward. Angela hesitated but followed her lead, her cheeks flushed with nervous excitement. Betty gently guided her, making sure she stayed involved in the action. Mike watched the scene from the shadows, seething with rage. He clenched his fists, wanting to burst in and put an end to the madness, but he forced himself to hold back. He needed to see just how far his fiancée would go with these strangers. "I think it's time I got better acquainted with the other guy," Betty joked, moving on and leaving Angela to continue her awkward attempts. Meanwhile, the other women, Christine and Dolly, began taking turns joining in the festivities. Eventually, all 4 friends settled into the wild atmosphere. They stood together on the couch, leaning against its back, laughing and shouting with excitement as the men continued to entertain them. Angela, being the boldest, went first, encouraging the others to follow suit. The men kept switching places, much to the women's delight. Mike could hardly stand to watch as the evening spiraled further out of control. He ground his teeth, boiling inside at the realization that Angela, the woman he had planned to marry, had become unfaithful. Mike knew he wasn't going to marry this woman. He left the camera on the floor and quietly made his way to the front of the house where the cars were parked. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a pair of pliers and scratched the word idiots onto the trunk of their car. Then he grabbed the screwdriver and punctured both rear tires. They won't notice this now. But halfway to Louisville, they'll get a surprise, Mike thought with a grin. He quickly returned to the back of the cottage. The two men had put on their coats and were collecting money from Betty. After giving deep kisses to all four women, they left. They got into the car and drove off, completely unaware of the punctured tires. Betty shut the front door and turned to her friends. "We need to do this regularly," she said. The other three friends nodded in agreement. "Maybe we should plan a girls' night out once a month," Angela suggested. "That's a great idea," Christine replied. They all laughed. "The night is still young and we've got plenty to drink. Let's have another round," Betty shouted cheerfully. Mike had had enough. He grabbed the camera and shut the door behind him. He felt beaten, betrayed, and on the verge of tears. He had trusted her. Gathering his courage, he made his way in the dark to the SUV and crawled underneath it. Using pliers, he cut the zip ties and removed the GPS tracker. Then he deflated all four tires and, feeling broken, walked back to his car. The next day, Sunday, around noon, Mike arrived at Paul's place. "What's going on?" "I could tell something was wrong from your call," Mike said, looking concerned. "Betty was supposed to be here at 10. She's not answering my calls." "It goes straight to voicemail," Paul replied. "Have you tried calling the others?" "Let me try Angela," Mike suggested, dialing Angela's number on speed dial. Nothing. "Try calling Christine and Dolly," Paul urged. Mike called both women, but neither picked up. "Have you sent her a message?" "Of course," Paul answered, clearly worried. "What if something's happened to them?" Mike grabbed his phone and typed out a text message. "I'm with Paul. He's worried. Betty was supposed to be here at 10. Call me." He hit the send button. "Let's wait and see if Angela calls me back," he said. Paul pulled 2 cans of beer from the fridge and handed one to Mike. Half an hour passed, and Angela still hadn't responded. Frustrated, Mike angrily typed, "If you don't call me right now, I'm ending this relationship. Sometimes you've got to." "Take the bull by the horns," Mike said, winking at Paul. Just then his phone rang. "Are you out of your mind?" Angela yelled into the phone. "Paul and I are losing it here." "None of you are answering your phones or responding to our messages," Mike shouted back. "Don't," Angela started. "Where are you?" Mike interrupted her. "We had a flat tire and we called roadside assistance. They'll be here soon." "Where are you?" Mike demanded, his voice rising. "Don't worry. It's just a flat tire. I'm asking you one last time. Where are you?" "Please calm down," Paul whispered. "We're at the cottage by Elmer Davis Lake. Tell Betty to pick up her phone. Paul is calling her." Paul immediately dialed his wife's number and stepped a few feet away to talk to her privately. "Now tell me, why didn't anyone answer when Paul called?" Mike asked. "We didn't want to bother him about the tires," Angela replied hesitantly. "Actually, you bothered us by not answering your phones. Call roadside assistance. They'll come and put on the spare tire. Where exactly are you located?" "Well," Angela hesitated. "All 4 tires are flat." "What?" Mike acted surprised. "How could that happen?" "We don't know." "Then you'd better wait for roadside assistance to arrive." Mike glanced at Paul. "Paul and I are heading to Louisville to have some fun." "What? What kind of fun?" Angela asked, alarmed. Mike hung up without answering her. "Call Ron and Al and see if they'd like to join us for a boys' night out," Mike said to Paul without batting an eye. That evening, the 4 guys drove to Louisville and had a great time. They enjoyed dinner, visited a gentleman's club to watch women, performed pole dances, and then ended up at a bar. Mike struggled to keep his composure throughout the night. Before heading out, Mike raised his glass for a toast. "Guys, I have a proposition," he said. "We're listening," the other 3 said in unison. "We're not going to have sex with our significant others until my honeymoon." "But why?" Paul asked. "Just to teach them a lesson, that we are men and we control everything," Mike declared. "I'm in," Ron agreed. "I support the idea." "It's a good one," muttered Al, who was already a bit tipsy. If everyone agrees, I won't argue, Paul said with a smile. Let's hope each of us sticks to his word, Mike said confidently. We will, the three friends exclaimed in unison. And no, one should spill the beans about what we did last night, Mike emphasized. The next day, Angela called Mike and asked where he had been and what he had done with his friends the night before. The only thing Angela learned from Betty was that Paul had come home late, drunk, and had gone to sleep in the guest bedroom. The others didn't say anything. Otherwise, the girls would already know, Mike thought. You see, Angela, I don't know where all of you were during the party or what you were doing. So, why are you so curious about us? I already told you we were at the cottage. We drank, ate, danced, and shared some naughty stories. You only told me you were at the cottage after the party and only after multiple unanswered phone calls. We also drank, ate, danced, and shared some naughty stories. Oh, is that all? What do you think? That we went and slept with the whole town? Mike replied aggressively. I need to calm down, he thought to himself. No, I didn't mean anything like that. I know you wouldn't do something like that, Angela said softly. You're right. I would never do such a thing. We're in an exclusive relationship, aren't we? Yes, of course, yes. Mike noticed the fear in Angela's voice. But there's one important thing. According to family tradition, we shouldn't have any contact until we meet at the church. What? Yes, Angela, I'd like to honor that. I hope you understand. Yes, darling, I understand. Good. I'll see you at the altar. Angela was still in shock when Mike hung up with a sharp click. He was cold. No more, darling, sweetheart, honey, or I love you. Maybe it's just pre-wedding jitters, Angela told herself. Mike stood at the altar with the priest behind him. Paul, Ron, and Al stood as his groomsmen, while Betty, Christine, and Dolly stood as Angela's bridesmaids. The church was packed with guests. As the wedding march began to play, Peter escorted his daughter Angela down the aisle. In her wedding dress, she truly looked like an angel. My dear friends, the priest began the ceremony. We are gathered here today. Excuse me, Father, Mike interrupted. Before you begin, I have a few words I need to say. It won't take long. Everyone was stunned, turning their eyes to Mike. This isn't exactly standard procedure, my son, the priest said. But if you won't take much time, go ahead. Thank you, Father, Mike said with a polite smile to the priest before turning to Angela. What are you going to say? Angela whispered nervously to Mike. Don't worry, Mike whispered back before addressing the guests. The first time I met Angela was right here in this church more than a year ago. For me, it was love at first sight. When Paul told me she wasn't married and didn't have a boyfriend, I made it my mission to win her heart. And I did. We dated for a year before I asked her to be my wife, and as you all know, she said yes. Everyone laughed, and the priest smiled and shook his head. I love you, Angela whispered. Mike nodded in acknowledgement. When we started dating, we made a promise to be exclusive. I kept that promise. And today, in our wedding vows, we will say 3 important words, forsaking all others. Darling, where are you going with this? Angela asked, now slightly worried. Forsaking all others doesn't just mean no one intends to cheat after the wedding, Mike shouted. Everyone glanced around, confused about what was happening. Angela and her 3 friends stood frozen, fear etched on their faces. Paul gave Mike a grim look. An hour ago, I received a call. Mike lied. It was a private number, and a woman's voice told me to watch a video on a website. She gave me a link, which I'm about to share with you all. Mike pulled out his phone and started sending text messages. I'll also send it to you, Father, Mike said, turning to the priest. What's he talking about? Betty whispered to Angela. What video? Dolly asked. I don't know, Angela sobbed. Anyone who hasn't received my message can look at the screen of someone who has, Mike added. The guests broke into small groups, huddling around their phones. Paul, Ron, and Al stared intently at their screens. Betty, Christine, and Dolly clung to Angela. "It's a video from Angela's bachelorette party," Mike said. Mike turned to the group of Angela, Betty, Christine, and Dolly. The four of them froze in place and listened closely to how they planned to throw parties like this every month, Mike added. "I knew she was trash," Mary shouted. Josh grabbed his wife's hand and shook his head. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. Adulteress. Paul yelled at Betty, "Don't come home tonight. I'm throwing all your stuff out." Into the street. "Take your ass wherever you want. I'm divorcing you." Betty began to cry. "I love you. You all had unprotected sex. I don't even know what diseases you might be carrying now," Paul shouted angrily. "Children, please calm down. You are in the house of God." "Show some respect," the priest said, struggling to diffuse the situation. Julie turned to Mary with a fierce glare. "My daughter is not trash." "Then she must be an adulteress," a voice called out from the back. "I wouldn't mind being with Betty," another voice said. "Please, you are in a church," the priest pleaded. The priest was pleading, his voice rising above the cacophony that had taken over the church. Mike noticed Paul starting to become aggressive, so he moved his three friends toward the entrance to avoid further trouble. "This wasn't my idea, Paul. You have..." "To believe me," Betty desperately tried to explain. "What?" Christine and Dolly turned on each other. "Did you forget that you were the one who organized your bachelorette party?" Christine snapped. "And the next day I had to buy you a Plan B pill," Dolly shouted. "Please, Mike, it was a mistake." "Don't leave me. Please, I love you," Angela begged. "A mistake that took days, if not weeks, to plan," Mike yelled back. "Don't listen to that woman, Mike," Mary chimed in. "Listen to your mother, son," Josh added. "Say something, Peter," Julie said irritably. "What do you want me to say?" "If I were Mike, I would have slapped Angela before leaving her at the altar," Peter said, gritting his teeth. Then he stood up and walked over to Mike. "I'm so sorry, son. Truly sorry." He then left the church, wiping tears from his face. Ron took out a ring, showed it to Christine, shook his head, and put it back in his pocket. Christine fell to her knees and began to cry. Mike pulled out 2 plane tickets and handed them to his father. "I changed the names to yours and Mom's. I've already instructed the limo driver. He'll take both of you home to grab your passports and luggage. Then he'll drive you to the airport. You'll love the Seychelles." "But son, that's not necessary," his father protested. "You both really need a vacation." "Enjoy." "What are you planning to do?" Mary asked anxiously. "We're going to celebrate our freedom," Paul chimed in. Like teenagers, the 4 men dashed outside and piled into Paul's car. Everyone began leaving the church, leaving the 4 friends and Julie behind. "I'll have to write my report based on the evidence I have," the priest said to the women. "I sincerely hope to see all of you at confession." He turned and walked away. "Let's go, sweetheart. Let's go," Julie said, taking Angela by the hand. "You'll definitely find someone better. He's the best man I've ever met," Angela sighed. "Can I stay with you too until I figure things out?" Betty asked Christine and Dolly. "Not a chance! Not after you tried to throw us under the bus!" Christine snapped. Angela turned to the 3 women. "Do what I'm going to do! Leave this town! It's so humiliating! I can't face the people here anymore!" She wiped her tears and walked her mother to the exit. 3 years later, San Jose, California. In a small church in the suburbs, a groom stood at the altar, waiting for his bride to walk down the aisle. Suddenly, 2 young men covered in tattoos and piercings burst into the building, handing out flyers to all the guests. The unexpected attack left everyone confused. One of the men ran up to the groom and handed him a flyer. "She's a good adulteress," he said. The man laughed and ran away. Both intruders exited the church, shouting insults about the bride as they left. The groom looked at the photos on the flyer and read the website address. He glanced at the guests. All of them were on their phones, talking or typing. He put his own phone away. Mike's phone started ringing. He didn't recognize the number. "Why did you do this to me? Why?" Angela sobbed. "Angela, is that you? What happened? What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about." "I honestly don't. Tell me what's going on. You ruined my wedding. That's what you did. This is your revenge on me. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I don't even know where you went after you left Georgetown. Who are you talking to, darling?" Angela heard a woman's voice in the background. "Listen, I just got back from my second honeymoon. This time we were in the Seychelles. Remember the Seychelles? I haven't even unpacked my suitcase yet." "Who is that?" Angela heard a woman's voice, again, this time irritated. "It's Angela, my ex." "Oh, that witch. What does that adulteress want?" "I don't know. She's crying. Something about her wedding, I think," Mike replied to his wife. "Good for her." "Darling, please change your phone number," his wife said firmly. Angela hung up, buried her face in a pillow, and continued crying. 6 months later, Tacoma, Washington. Mike parked the rental car in the shopping center lot directly across from the church where the wedding ceremony was about to take place. Sipping his coffee, he watched the building's entrance. At first, he had been against this idea, but Paul's persistent persuasion had eventually worn him down. He carefully observed Angela and Betty. Mike was the one in charge of Angela's wedding. He had flown to San Jose and handled all the arrangements. He had taken a few stills from the infamous bachelorette party video and printed them with the website address. Now it was Mike's turn to return the favor. Meanwhile, Paul had taken his new wife to Las Vegas, an ideal alibi in case any questions arose. Mike kept his eyes on the entrance and suddenly spotted the groom storming out of the church. Furious, the groom ripped off the small bells tied to the back of his car and tore off the "Just Married" sign, angrily tossing it aside. At that moment, Betty, dressed in her wedding gown, ran up to him, pleading. She was crying. The groom shoved her away, got into his car, and drove off. Mike started the engine and headed to the airport. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of English Epics. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.